Tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome everyone to this Books Alive event with Giselle Clarkson and Matthew Cunningham, along with tamariki from Manchester Street School in Feilding and Campbells Bay School in Auckland. Giselle Clarkson is a freelance illustrator, and she illustrates stuff for grown-ups and kids. She illustrates books, magazines, pamphlets, websites, prints, almost anything. Giselle illustrated a finalist book in the picture book category of the New Zealand Book Awards for children and young adults called the Gobbledegook book, which was written by Joy Cowley. Matthew Cunningham wrote his first masterpiece in kindergarten. Unfortunately, as he had yet to grasp the concept of writing in straight lines from left to right, his book, The Clock, read more like a bowl of alphabet soup than a book. Since then, he's turned his hand to a number of different writing styles, but Abigail and the Birth of the Sun is his first published picture book. Matthew and Giselle are going to talk a bit about their books and the way they work, and then the tamariki will ask some questions. So, Matthew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Matthew Cunningham aho. I'm a writer, and I also work for the Ministry for the Environment. I have been writing, for as long as I can remember, really. Ever since I first picked up a pen, probably. I've been writing stories, thinking of stories, writing them down. But it's only really been in the last sort of 5 to 10 years that I started thinking about children's books. And I think in part that's because I actually I have a daughter whose name is Abigail. She's 6. And after she was born, I really started thinking about the kind of stories that she was reading and the kind of stories she was interested in. And then as she got a little bit older and she started to talk, and she started talking very early, she started asking these really big questions. I'm sure you all know about these. You probably ask these questions all the time of your own parents. How big is the universe, and why is the sky blue, and where does the rain come from, and all sorts of questions. Same kind of questions I used to ask as a kid. Now, naturally, if I have I've got a 3-year-old daughter who asks a question about where the sun comes from, I can't really tell her about supernova and dust enriching the interstellar medium and things like that, because she's not going to understand any of that. So when she asked me that question when she was about 3 years old, I just sort of came up with a story on the spot about this big old star who was very old and very lonely, and who suddenly felt a rumbling in her stomach, and she exploded outwards and gave birth to all these new stars and planets and all the life on them and that sort of thing. Also, I could get to this message of how we're all made of stardust. She really liked that story, and after I told it, I thought to myself, I wonder if that's the children's book I've been thinking about writing. So I did. I wrote it, and I spoke to a friend and former colleague of mine, another writer by the name of Lawrence Patchett, and he gave me some really good advice on how to, turn it into a really good kid's story, and the rest was history, basically. I wrote it up and sent it off to a literary agent, and then it became a book. So, yeah, that's kind of how it came about. And now, obviously, I'm hoping to turn it into a series. So, because my daughter Abigail has lots of big questions, which means there's potentially lots of stories to tell. Yeah, that's how my book came into being.
Giselle, would you like to talk a bit?
Yeah, so kia ora, I'm Giselle, and I'm an illustrator, and that's what I do for my job. I illustrate lots and lots of different things for all sorts of people, like You might have seen some of my work in school journals, where I also write articles, and also some of the early readers that go out into schools. And the Gobbledegook book is my second picture book that I've illustrated. The first one was from a couple of years ago, and it was called The Secret World of Butterflies. And I always wanted to illustrate picture books. That's been a dream of mine for a really, really long time, ever since I was a kid, I guess. But before I got into picture books, I was illustrating all sorts of other things. And then when I got I had lots of practice drawing these other things, and then I got the opportunity to start with picture books, and it's all just been sort of going from there, and it's really exciting. But I still illustrate lots of other things. And so this one is an anthology of Joy Cowley's stories from things that she's been publishing even before I was born. And it was a really interesting job, and also a little bit scary, because I was actually re-illustrating these stories, so that they'd all been illustrated by someone else a long time ago, some of them. And so I had to sort of pretend like I was thinking about these stories for the first time, and it was quite difficult because I actually grew up with a lot of the stories in this book when I was your age and even younger. These were picture books like Nickety Nackety Noo that I loved, and I still remember the stories really well, and I remember the pictures. And so having the opportunity to do that myself was exciting but scary at the same time. What else? That might be about it. I think that's me.
That's great. Well, I'm going to switch over to the kids at Manchester Street School. Would you guys like to ask some questions?
So go to
Kia ora. Kia ora, I'm Hannah. I'm a proud member of the Manchester Street School's Books and Cookies group. This is a group of 18 senior students who love books and chocolate biscuits. We meet weekly during lunchtime and discuss books and our love of reading. We have a special journal reading logs that we have challenges and activities, including a variety of genres. MSS has an amazing library with a huge range of wonderful books. We also have Mrs. Bennett, our librarian extraordinaire.
What are we?
right. Robert, do you want to start with the question? So you'll time to talk. Yeah. So you want to ask Giselle one first? Hi, Giselle.
Hi, Giselle. How did you become the chosen author of this book? Illustrator of this book.
Well, so it's published by Gecko Press, who are a fairly small publisher based in Wellington, and they knew about my work because I'd been putting my drawings online, and I'd been making comics too about picture books and stuff like that. There's a website called The Sapling where I do regular comics about picture books, and sometimes I do reviews of books and that sort of thing. And the publishers at Gecko Press knew about my work. They'd been sort of keeping an eye on me. And when they had a project come up that they thought I'd be a good fit for, they asked me to come in for a meeting. And it was actually something completely different. They originally got me in to see if I'd like to illustrate a cookbook. And I thought that sounded really cool, and I did some sample images for that, which included drawing a really happy chicken. And they saw that picture of the chicken and they thought, we know who would like this. And they sent it to Joy Cowley, and she loved the chicken. and so that's where they got the idea that perhaps I could illustrate Joy Cowley's book. So that's what I did instead, and actually the cookbook came afterwards, and that's it here. It will be out fairly soon. But yeah, that's how I got this job.
Did you meet Joy Cowley?
Yeah, I did. Actually, at the launch for the Gobbledegook book, which was held in Feilding last September, that was the first time I met her. So I'd already done all the work on the book. I'd done all the illustrations. It was already published and it was out in the shops before I even met her. But what I think's funny is that when I was 6 years old, Joy Cowley was supposed to come to my school and talk to my class and read us stories. And I was really, really excited when I found out that she was coming. But on the day, something happened and she couldn't turn up. And I was so, so disappointed. And I've always remembered how disappointed I was. But then it was about 25 years later when I met her at the launch of this book. And I thought perhaps it was worth the wait after all.
Hi Giselle. What inspired you to become an illustrator?
Sorry, what was the start of that question?
What inspired you to become an illustrator?
Other books, other illustrators, and all my favourite books. That's what really inspired me. It wasn't actually until it was about 5 years ago that I realised I could be an illustrator. I'd always loved picture books, even when I'd sort of grown out of them, which I don't think is even a thing. I think that picture books are really for everyone. And I loved the illustrations so much, and I'd always admired illustrators, but it wasn't until I was about 25 years old that I thought, hang on, I could do that. Because I have always loved drawing, always. But it took a long time for me to realise that it was a job that I could do.
Robert, do you want to ask me some questions while that's in front of you?
Hi Matthew.
Kia ora.
Did you get a say in who illustrated your book?
Oh, kia ora. Robert, was it?
Yeah.
Kia ora. So I got some say. So as a first-time author, or a first-time children's author anyway, the publisher, what they tend to do is I just write the manuscript and I send it in, and then they look at it and they paired me with who they thought would be a good fit for the book. And they said, you know, we found this illustrator, Sarah Wilkins. Here's some of her work. What do you think? And I said, oh, fantastic. Sounds great. I'd known her work before. I know she did some work on a series of books called Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. Some of you might have read. And just amazing work. So I just, when they suggested her, I thought, yeah, great. That sounds great. So I guess I got some choice, but being a first-time author, the publisher as well, they've got a lot of experience. They know, which illustrator is likely to work best with which kind of book. And to be honest as well, I tend to think a lot more in words than I do in pictures anyway. So I didn't really have a very clear idea of what the book would look like in my head. I just sort of had very vague ideas, really. So I was quite happy for the publisher to suggest an illustrator, and for Sarah to then just, have license to come up with whatever she thought worked, really. And yeah, she did amazing stuff. I remember when I first saw it, it just blew me away. Yeah.
Let's ask Mrs. Palmer as well, so we can see what introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I've got a question for you, Matthew.
Kia ora, Jacob.
Mrs. Palmer, a Year 5-6 teacher and co-organiser of Books and Blickies, loves figurative language. What is your favourite type?
Wow. That is a good question. I quite like figurative language as well, actually. I like using similes, metaphors, all those sorts of things, because the kind of writing I do, both stories, fiction writing like Abigail and the Birth of the Sun, and history, because I also write history, I'm often dealing with some really, really complex ideas. And in order to get those ideas across to the audience, sometimes you have to use things like metaphors and similes to make it so that people really understand what you're trying to say, especially for a children's book. Like, Abigail and the Birth of the Sun is all about supernova and, all these huge galactic processes that go on in space. If I don't know, any of you guys interested in space? Hands up. Oh, pretty much everyone. Oh, you guys are awesome. So you know all about supernova and all that sort of stuff. But to like a 3-year-old, they're not really going to know what that's about. But if you wrap it up in a story where instead of talking about a supernova, you're talking about this old star who's feeling lonely and who, explodes forth into space and gives birth to all these new stars and planets, that's something that your audience, being young children, can understand and relate to, and they really get into it. And then when they get a little older and they start learning about science, they already have that kind of familiarity there with the concepts, So yeah, I'm a big fan of figurative language. Yeah, I use it a lot in pretty much all the kind of writing I do. Good question.
I've got another question for you, Matthew. Is that the cat featured in the book inspired from a cat you know?
Good question. So, I had a similar experience to Giselle in that I didn't actually meet the illustrator, Sarah Wilkins, until a couple of weeks before the book launch, actually. She did the illustrations, and I got sent, drafts by the publisher to have a look at. So she actually came up with the idea of the cat all by herself. But when we saw it, and by we I mean myself and my daughter Abigail and my wife Helen, we thought it was great because we have a cat and his name is Sooty, and he actually looks very similar to the cat in the book. So when we saw a cat on every page, it was just perfect. In fact, if you wait 1 second, wait here for a moment. I knew he wouldn't be far away. This is Sooty. You know why I knew he wouldn't be far away? Because it's cold and it's rainy here, and he's sitting in front of the heater keeping warm. So, yes. So to answer your question, the cat in the book wasn't intended to be a cat I knew, but by a happy coincidence, we had a cat who just looked just like him. Okay, you can go now, Baba.
Will I ask each of them what your favourite book is?
Thank you so much, Manchester Street School kids. I think it's around about time now to let the Campbells Bay School kids ask some questions. So thank you.
Ka kite.
See ya.
Ngā mihi ki koutou.
Kia ora, Campbells Bay School kids. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask some questions?
Hi, we are Campbells Bay School. We're very happy to be here today.
Kia ora koutou.
We are the librarians from Campbells Bay School. We have some questions for you. What is your favorite part about being an author or illustrator?
Do you want to go first, Giselle?
Sure, yeah. My favourite part, when I get to draw all day long, that's my favourite part. Or when I get to draw things that I really love, things that I find really fun to draw, that's probably the best bit. There are lots of other things that come with being an illustrator, because I also have to do there's some boring stuff, like a lot of emailing, and I have to do lots of organising money and that sort of thing. But some days I get to just focus on drawing pictures, and that's my favourite thing in the world to do. If I wasn't doing it for a job, I'd be doing it for a hobby. So.
Yeah, I have to agree, actually. So I actually work for the Ministry for the Environment 4 days a week, but I have 1 day a week, Wednesdays, which is my writing day. And it's my favourite day of the week. If I could do it every day, I would. Just the ability to sit down and write all day, or most of the day, is definitely the best part about it. It's just really an amazing feeling, you know, whether I'm writing at home or I'm at the library in town. Yeah, it's definitely the best part.
I'm just going to pause us here because we're getting a bit of feedback, and I wonder whether Campbells Bay School, have you got a loudspeaker on or something?
No, we don't have a loudspeaker. No, we're just functioning off the laptop, so there's no other speaker.
Okay, then maybe what we'll do is one thing you can do is you can mute yourselves, but then just hold down the space bar when someone is talking, so that if the other person is talking, we don't get the feedback. Would you like to have a go at doing that for the next question?
Yeah, will do.
Okay, I'll switch back over to you, and you can ask the next question.
How long does it take for you to write/illustrate a book?
I might go first with this one, if that's okay, because I feel like Giselle, as the illustrator, has a much harder job than I do as the writer. So it really depends upon what kind of book I'm writing. I write children's fiction, but I also write history, and I write science fiction and fantasy fiction for adults. A children's book, I can probably write, if I know what I want to write, I can get a first draft done in probably half a day. It doesn't take too long because it's fairly short, you know, anywhere between 500 and 2,000 words. So I'll write out the first draft, then I'll probably let it sit for a day or two, and I'll come back to it and I'll review it, and I'll think about how I might want to change things around. But yeah, the actual writing part for a children's book anyway doesn't take a lot of time. What probably takes longer is then the publishing process, because I'll then send my draft story to my agent, and she'll have a look at it, and she'll tell me if she thinks it needs any changes. Then she'll send it out to publishers to see if any publishers are interested in publishing it. And that all takes time because publishers have a lot of material they need to get through. So yeah, the writing part is very short, but the publication process often takes much longer. And that's when the illustrator comes in, and I'll hand over to Giselle to talk about that.
Yeah, so what Matthew said is right, that the illustrator actually comes in really quite near the end of the whole process. And I'm usually given quite a strict time limit, how long I can spend on a book, and that's all decided by the publisher, really. I have no say in that. So sometimes for some projects, the publisher might say, you have a whole year to do this or something. And other times it's a lot less. But I sort of have a reputation for being quite fast with my work, and it's almost not a good thing, because it means that people come to me with tighter and tighter and tighter deadlines all the time. So usually, like most of the books that I do, they only take sort of 2 or 3 months of illustrating, which is a fairly short amount of time, because you have to take into account all the feedback. So I might work for a couple of weeks and then send all my sort of early sketches off, and then it might be 1 or 2 weeks later even that I get feedback from the publishers and from the book designer, and then I'll do a bit more and then send it away for more feedback. So yeah, like the Gobbledegook book was about 3 months. Although what tends to happen is that you can finish about 95% of the book in 3 months, and then there'll be this extra little 5% of just fixing up tiny little details, and maybe this should go there and maybe this should go here, and do we need just one more little picture here, and that can actually take a long time. Like that can take sort of 3 months again, and I'm not really working on it every day at that point. It's just little bits here and there to get it just right at the very end.
What is your favorite book that you have written or illustrated?
Do you want to go first, Giselle?
Sure. It's really difficult. It's a really hard question. The Gobbledegook book I'm very, very proud of, because it was a big deal for me. It was really, really exciting to work on that and to have the chance to put my work to these stories that I've known and grown up with my whole life and are considered classics for a lot of people. So that it could be my favourite. Although I always like the last thing that I did the best, because I always like moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, because that's what really excites me and always sort of motivates me and keeps me going. So the most recent book that I've illustrated is this cookbook called Egg and Spoon, and it's not out in the bookshops yet, but it's nearly there, and so I'm really, really excited because I can't wait to share it with everyone. And so it's this exciting time where I'm all finished with it, but I just want to show everybody. And I mean, Matthew might feel the same, because I know he's got another one coming out really soon.
Yeah, it's a tough question, isn't it? In a way, the stories that you write, and I imagine the stories that you illustrate, are kind of like children in a way. You can't really pick a favorite, because they're all good in their own ways, you know. I do really like the Abigail series, and Giselle, thank you for the plug. The second one, Abigail and the Restless Raindrop, comes out tomorrow. Probably some of my favorite stories are ones that aren't actually published yet, but I'm trying to get published. So there's a story I wrote called Bruce Bottomsley and His Problematic Bottom, which is all about a young boy who has uncontrollable flatulence. He farts lots and lots, and everybody is mean to him for it, and he feels really bad, so he has to hold it in. But, well, without spoiling that, let's just say that his unusual powers end up saving the day, and he ends up realizing that what he thought was his weakness was actually his biggest strength. So that's kind of one of my favorite ones, and my agent's trying to find a home for that one at the moment. Yeah, tough question. I think I like all my books in different ways.
Do you use pastels or crayons to illustrate?
I actually use a computer. It's all digital, but I really like your question actually, because even though I use the computer and I use a stylus like this and this, which is my drawing tablet, and I draw like this, and it all comes out on the screen in front of me. Even though I'm doing it all digitally, I actually try to get the look of loose crayons and pastel and watercolour and pencil, because I really like that look. But I guess when I first started illustrating, I was doing it on the computer because it was easy, and I didn't need much space to do it. I didn't have to worry about making a mess, and so that's, yeah. So I've been trying to make it look like I'm making a big mess, but actually it's all digital.
To become an author or an illustrator, do you have to go to university?
I did go to university, but I studied fine arts, and I majored in photography. So I studied to be a photographer, but I never became a photographer. I don't think I ever really wanted to be a photographer. It was just something interesting to do. And so sort of the answer's yes and no, because even though I didn't learn any skills that sort of directly relate to illustration at university, I did learn a lot of skills that sort of slightly indirectly relate to it and help me every day. Like there's things about composition that I learnt with photographs that I apply to all my drawings. And at university, we're always encouraged to read a lot, to talk to a lot of people, to always stay up with current events, basically learn as much as we could about the world and everything going on, and then apply that to the work we were making. And so that's something I think about when I illustrate as well. And the other thing was that we learn how to look at our own work with a critical eye and think about, what looks good, what doesn't look so good, being really honest with yourself about what you could do better, or what you're really proud of, and what looks really cool. And also taking feedback from other people, which is a really important part of my job, is listening to, whether it's sort of my publisher or a designer that I'm working with. They will come back to me and say, yeah, this bit works really well, but I don't know about this bit. Could we try something else? And, I'm able to take that feedback and listen carefully to what they're saying and show them something new and build on my work that way. So that's what I got out of university, even though it wasn't an illustration degree.
That's for Matthew, so.
This is a question for Matthew. What's your number one tip for writing a book?
That's a very good question. What was your name, sorry?
Hazel.
Hazel. Kia ora, Hazel. I don't know if I have one number one tip. I think I have three, actually. I have three number one tips. The first tip, and probably the most important, so maybe this is the number one tip, is just to write as much as you can, as often as you can. If you want to be a writer, the only way you can get better at writing really is by writing. I just said writing about 10 times in the last sentence, I know. But seriously, the more you do it, the more you practice at it, the better you'll get at it. Your vocabulary will expand. Your ability to write characters and dialogue and interesting plot will expand. Yeah, it's all really practice. I remember reading somewhere that the first 1,000,000 words that an author writes are like training, and then after you've done that, then you're ready to start writing books. I don't know how true that is or not. I've probably written a couple of million before I got my first book published, but yeah, I think the message there is just to practice writing every day, whether it's writing stories at school, if you've got a journal at home, write in that, even writing emails, like writing emails to whanau and stuff, or writing letters. Like, it can be a really good way to practice your style, I guess. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is read as much as you can, as often as you can. And judging by these two school groups, you're already well over that. I imagine you guys are reading all the time. Yeah, whatever books you're interested in, even books you're not interested in, just read as much as you can, because that'll again give you an appreciation of different styles of writing, different genres. And it'll help you actually develop your own voice as a writer. One of my favorite authors, George R.R. Martin, talks about how all authors start out with an imitative phase, wherein you have a favorite author and you tend to just write like they do. And I did that when I started writing. And that's good, because that's you starting to figure out your own style, you know? So that's tip number two. Tip number three, and I'll keep it very quick, is be curious. Ask the big questions. Think about the big questions. Don't be afraid to investigate and discover the answers to new questions, because that really is that's the seed of your imagination. That's where you're coming up with these wondrous ideas that you'll be able to wrap into books. And that really is the spirit that I wanted to capture in these Abigail books. It's all about nurturing that seed of curiosity among young children, because it's so important, I think. Yeah, those are my three top tips. Good question.
Campbells Bay, would you like to have one last question?
We're happy for Matthew to ask his question.
I was just going to ask if there was anyone who wanted to talk about any stories that they're writing. Does anyone from Campbells Bay want to talk about one of the stories they're writing?
So at the moment, my class is basically writing about like these train tracks, and there's like a photo of train tracks or a roller coaster sort of thing, and we have to write a descriptive, entertaining writing story about it. And I've written about, it's somebody's birthday and they're going to go to Disney World, but it's actually abandoned and they have to do all these things to get out.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. Who's the main character?
Well, there's three characters, Jane, Jordan, and I forgot the last guy's name.
That's right. Jane and Jordan are the most important characters then.
Does anybody else have one? Alex, did you want to share yours? Okay, you might have to come close or shout really loudly. Okay, so you try. Big loud voice.
Oh, I actually am like writing an entire series on my own.
Wow.
Well, like the dragons and
A bit louder.
will naturally appear on an egg. And the egg has like armor for the dragon. And as the dragon gets bigger, the armor gets bigger too. So yeah.
Cool. So they're dragons that appear in our world, and their armor starts getting bigger after they appear. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Cool. So my question for you is, what do everyday people going out their everyday lives, going to school, going to work, what do they do when these dragons suddenly turn up?
They're probably going to take them home and just cover it in pillows.
What was that, sorry?
A bit louder, Alex.
They'll probably just take the egg home and start covering it with pillows.
Take their eggs home.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a good angle, because I think that's the first thing that I thought of when I thought of just say I'm going to pick up my daughter from school this afternoon, and a dragon suddenly lands on my car bonnet. What am I going to do? Me, an average day person, what am I going to do about it? And that, I think, is going to be if I may suggest, that could be a really cool part of your series, is not only dragons suddenly turning up in just the everyday world, but what do people do when that happens? It's kind of like a UFO lands in your backyard. What do you do? What is it every day? How does that change everyday life, right? And I like the idea of them taking the dragon's eggs, because it's like, I think people would first be pretty amazed when they see these dragons, but then once they get used to them, some people are going to be thinking, well, how can we use dragons to our advantage? Maybe we'll take their eggs and we'll keep them as pets. And then what does the mama dragon do when that happens? She's going to get pretty angry, right? Yeah, that's a cool story. I can think there's going to be some really good stories that come out of your series.
Well, that was a really fascinating session, and I think that the tamariki asked some really great questions. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Matthew and Giselle, and a big thank you to Manchester Street School and Campbells Bay School for your excellent questions. And we are looking forward to putting these videos up live so you can come back and watch them and show your friends and your classmates and your mums and dads. So big round of applause for everybody. Well done.